Hello everybody, welcome to Autistic Radio. We're here every Sunday for a live broadcast and the meeting that involves Autistic Association, the Holy Autistic Charity, and also Autistic Radio, one of the services that's supported by Autistic Radio, Autistic Association. It's been a hectic week. A lot of things have happened all at once. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. Over the last 2 years, I had negotiated with a group of benefactors and investors a total fund of £500,000 that was available with very specific strings attached. The strings attached were that the money, if I managed to allocate it somewhere, had to represent the new paradigm of co-production between autistic groups, an autistic group, an autistic APO, not just autistic people randomly, but autistic groups, and the conventional professionals that have been out there already. I was expected to not tempt people in by telling them that there was this big amount of money available. I was expected to ensure that the people who eventually came to receive money for projects had come without being tempted by money, but had come wholeheartedly with the idea of creating that group's version of co-production. During the last 2 years, I had one particular group in mind, because I'd been recommended to it. It was called the Autistic Network, or the Autism Network, sorry. And over 2 years, I did my very best to negotiate with this group a version of co-production and a version of cooperation that would mean that the whole group would have access to quite a large chunk of money. And I failed. I think if I had made it clear that there was a large amount of money rather than hinting at it, I might have been more successful. But in the end, I ended up dispirited that one of the organisations that had professed to be most progressive was unwilling to work with us in an equal basis that would then have led to a rather large amount of input had we got a project that would have been beneficial to autistic people. I've managed to hold on to slightly less than half of that money, but some of those people who were patient enough to hold their funds for us have looked at some of the activities and decided that working alongside us hasn't met their requirements. And their requirements were for an organisation that had very professional standards, especially standards of communication with the public. The good news, however, is that there is going to be a substantial investment. It's not available for co-production with autism professionals to provide service for autistic people anymore, but it is available as an investment in a business. And as long as that business has a meaningful relationship with autistic people, to employ autistic people across all of the ranges of pay scale, then that money is being invested in us. So I will be able to come back to the group and say that a business is being created with some investment money that is there to benefit autistic people. So, moving on to other business, Autistic Radio has a very good opportunity on Thursday, and I've discussed it with the group as to what to do. We're going to introduce ourselves to the Minister responsible for health in the Scottish Parliament, and there's the possibility I may be able to network with a couple of other people who have influence. It's one of the few opportunities that autistic people get to have any influence that isn't gatekept and isn't set up in some kind of pretend forum. So I'm going to do my best to say one or two very small, short sentences that might benefit us, but you never know where that goes. I have to report that I did have a meeting in the previous week to a professional conference, and I had tickets to go there. I had a hotel booked, and I had a train booked, and late on the evening before the opportunity to join this professional group that was a national implementation scheme for Scotland, my tickets were cancelled by the organisers. And the reason given was that we as a group are not professionals in autism, and the conference wasn't aimed at us. The reason we got to know about the conference was a number of our allies and supporters had passed the email, well, 3 actually, had passed the email on to me to say, are you going to be there, Jules? Well, there are people that want us to be there, and there are people that would prefer to keep their professional organisations simply professional. Going forward, we have the upcoming conference, a professional conference for the Scottish Autism Group. They have organised it so that there is a reduced fee if an autistic group wants to pay to go in person or live, and represent themselves. But I don't think our organisation should be willing to pay for the amount asked, even at the reduced rate. So I've asked them for free tickets for the recording of what went on, so that we will be able to see what went on rather than involve ourselves in it. Of all of the professional groups, it has been a surprise to me that the professions that are most interested in offering us a version of a seat at the table have been the ones associated with behaviourism. It's the exact opposite to what I expected. I thought the professional groups who had behaviourist leanings would try and keep us away, but it seems to me that they are willing to have at least some kind of conversation with us, and I've been invited to go and speak in the springtime at a rather large conference, and they will be trying to pay my costs to go and join that in person. And if they can't manage to find money to pay my costs, then I'm going to be the joint speaker as a head on a screen. So a little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news there. But the most important thing is that the way we are going at the moment with the different things has accelerated, and the momentum of Autistic Association and Autistic Radio seems to be gathering pace at the moment. Is there any other business for anybody within the group?
No, just to say that thanks, just to give thanks for the update, being the trustee chairperson of Autism Association, and obviously being part of Autistic Radio as well. Just overall, thanks for the update, the in-depth update you just given there, and the hard work you've been doing behind the scenes, Jules. It's much appreciated.
I think, Harry, the nice thing now is that the group is a bit bigger. We currently have 6 trustees, whereas before we had 3. I think somewhere between 5 and 10 is probably the ideal number for the trusteeships of Autistic Association. And hopefully, as we approach the new year, we can say that the annual general meeting will be one where we can look positively on the future with even more activities happening in 2025. It may even be that we gain more supporters and more people who are willing to be involved with us more fully. I feel as though I've run out of things to say now, though, Harry. Is it possible that we could move to the main item of today and join you for the discussions of the Autistic Radio Facebook and what you've been sharing for us to discuss?
Thanks, Jules. Yes, absolutely. So welcome everybody. This is Live Unmasked, the Facebook sharing part of the broadcast tonight, where we share the Facebook posts, the most recent posts that have been shared, and we have a discussion over them. This is Live Unmasked for the 8th of December 2024. So moving on to the first post, is from Pete Warmby. And Pete Warmby is an autistic author and speaker on autism and autistic lived experience. And what he shared is about meltdowns, and it's from his own Pete Warmby books. And it says, meltdown is a reasonable response to the amount of stress and overwhelm autistic people experience. And I think it's a thing that, even though we've shared things like this before, very similar, and the topic's been raised before, it's worth repeating over and over so that people can hear it and people can learn from it. That meltdowns aren't the bad thing that's made out. It's not a tantrum. It's a genuine experience that happens because someone's affected or overwhelmed. What's other people's thoughts on this? Going to my own experience, the sort of meltdown, I wouldn't say I'm close to a meltdown at the moment, but it certainly is a triggering word when I'm feeling that I've been doing a lot and dealing with a lot within the past couple of weeks. In the run up to Christmas, the run up to the end of the calendar year, I'm involved in a lot of different organisations that are doing so many different things. Some things are involved with the Christmas period in terms of organising events, etc. And others just looking to wind down but have those last big meetings of decisions, like annual general meeting, for instance, or just something to do, or just to kind of timestamp the end of the year before we go into the festive break, which I am very looking forward to, because I'm beginning to feel, at this time of year, I always feel that I'm getting kind of tired. And I look forward to the break, and then the break comes, and then it's this sort of kind of minor boredom, and it's like I'm ready to get back to doing all this stuff again. But if this didn't come into play and it kept going, I know that a meltdown would come, and I certainly would want to avoid that. And in my experience, I've had meltdowns before, I've had panic attacks by just overindulging, just overdoing it. So at least from that experiences that I've had before, that I know that I can avoid it. But that doesn't mean that other people should avoid it, because sometimes it needs to happen for many people, without generalising.
I experienced a period of time this week that some people would describe as meltdown. And it doesn't change. However much you have the ability to have different ways of organising yourself and different ways of compensating for the difference in the way your brain works and the way your brain chemistry can be unbalanced sometimes. For me, lifetime experience of emotion that is too big for me to cope with is just part of my experience of autism. Both myself and my wife this week ended up in a situation where at different times one or other of us was not functioning. I had a period of time where I couldn't speak. I had a period of time where I was like a young child who was thrashing about. But fortunately, I'm in a position where, as an adult, I have some kind of control over my environment, so I can take myself to a quiet and dark room and support and comfort myself and look after myself and just shut down. But so many people don't have that opportunity.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Jules. Yeah, I can totally resonate with that. And how it can come about, and how, I suppose, meltdowns, it comes from the artistic experience and how you deal with things, because the world itself, society itself, can be so overwhelming anyway. Sometimes things that seem like a minor problem for some can be amplified to be a catastrophe, to self, because the environment you're in. Maybe things are too busy, maybe too many things are going at the one time, especially if it's a sudden change or a sudden thing that's happened. and there was no way for you to prepare for that thing happening. I mean, that's the kind of main thing I always try to do, is that overthink about it, of course, but what I try to do is prepare to cope for anything that I'm feeling, that things that may be a bit difficult, so that I don't need to worry about it, so I feel confident that it's getting dealt with when the time comes, and to avoid such a meltdown. But meltdowns can be needed sometimes, and that shouldn't be discouraged, and it should not be put a tag on it like it's something that, it's like someone not getting their way, so they're doing this sort of behaviour to try and get their way, because that's how it's stereotypically identified by many people, and it's identified by many people as someone that's losing control. And I wouldn't say it's that either. I think it's just basically somebody naturally resetting, but just resetting in a way that some people don't understand.
Yeah, and the text Ray's saying it's not intentional, and I think that's really important that people understand that when children do this, they are not manipulating. They are honestly dealing with what they're dealing with. Um, I have to say that one of the people that's impressed me recently is the professor that came to speak to us about in the series about ABA. And he's somebody that's moved away from ABA and behaviourism to some degree. And he has a project that tries to encourage people who still work with ABA and behaviourism to have a different approach to people who are often violent or in meltdown, the non-arousal methods. And it feels to me that naturally in my house, the two people here who are autistic and looking after each other as codependent people, they know from themselves how to avoid additional arousal, additional pressure that's put upon the person who cannot take any more input. And the thing that always concerns me about the professions that deal with autistic people, particularly people who deal with behaviourism, is that they add to the burden of the autistic person right at the point at which the autistic person needs the opposite, and then that gives them the authority over that autistic person generally, to say that that autistic person who has had a struggle maybe for a period of time, that they can't be trusted to deal with themselves again. And that's really not how it is. Meltdowns are very temporary normally, and it's up to the people around them to not arouse and not make them last longer, in my opinion.
The next post is from Robbie Prosser. And Robbie, autistic and proud, sharing my experience of living as an autistic person. I am also a musician. And what Robbie is sharing is a personal post about Christmas. Christmas is a very sad time for me, as I will spend much more time alone. What I value most is the time that I spend with friends. Many of the activities that I take part in stop over Christmas. On Monday it will be the last craft group in Chatterton at choir practice. On Tuesday it will be the last walk with the walking group. The choir and craft group in Chetterton and choir does not start until January, and the walking group does not start until February. I expect to spend most of the time alone in the flat. This year I had a disappointment of the performance with the choir cancelled. While some will be happy as they will spend time with family, which I would not want to spoil, I will spend Christmas alone. My parents are gone and the rest of the family have abandoned me. The local day centre are excluded for life because I had autistic meltdowns. They were when I was overwhelmed because they changed my life and lack of support. Despite working with therapists that specialise in autism for over 2 years and a counsellor that specialises in supporting autistic people, the trustees will not reconsider their decision against me. One of the trustees considered me intelligent but not worthy of support. Please consider those with no family when you make your Christmas arrangement and include them when you can. People don't choose their families. Some are not lucky enough to have a family to spend Christmas with. While some autistic people like being alone, it is not true for all autistic people. If you have met one autistic person, you have just met one autistic person. So that was a personal post from Robbie, and Robbie's personal experiences and opinions. And I just thought it was important to share that there'll be many like Robbie that will be feeling that at this time of year. And particularly people that have had family that are now gone, and just the way that some people, some autistic people in society will feel for all different kinds of reasons and situations, will feel excluded and will feel alone when they feel that the routines that they have built up and rely on finish for quite a considerable period of time, especially at Christmas time. What's other thoughts?
Yeah, I liked that he made the point that some people, some autistic people like being alone, but it's not true for all autistic people. It's a good distinction. And I would put myself in the former category, but I've got to understand the other category. And I would reflect on it that, yeah, it's a time when we expect a lot, so we have to ask ourselves what we actually want, what we need, and find some kind of support to enable us to access what we need rather than what we may expect. But he's mentioned his history there, a lot of loss, and of course that can't be filled. So, or maybe it could, but it needs a lot of support for a sensitive person.
It seems to me that Robbie has painted himself into a corner, and that's not his fault, but he has been part of it. And whenever he comes and he makes one of these posts, he rightly points out that other people contribute to this, but there are alternatives, Robbie. The drop-in here is available for you every single Sunday for an hour at 444, whether you want to speak, text or be silent with us. and we keep each other company. Between Christmas and New Year, Autistic Radio has 4 separate days where we broadcast, and we also have live group meetings and live broadcasts, and also drop-ins for the 4 days between Christmas and New Year. Exactly the periods that you're feeling lonely is what we've set up to alleviate. So Robbie and anyone else who feels as though they've burnt their boats, who feels as though they've kicked people and they've finally given up with them, have another chance. Come and join us and spend time with us, other autistic people who have also painted themselves into a corner. Because here we follow the principle that Maurice Frank set out right at the beginning, that nobody gets excluded and everybody is always welcome back to the things that we do at Autistic Radio. Not necessarily the parts that we have to have as a professional organisation, but the actual things that we do, the recordings and the meetings and the opportunities to be amongst other autistic people. Nobody ever gets excluded from them. So, if you melt down with us, Rob, you'll be fine. Just come and join us.
The next post is from Yale Clark, developmental psychologist. Anxiety and OCD in children and parents, special focus on autistic and ADHDers, based in Australia. And what they're talking about is the term neurodivergent and their perspective from it and their direction from it. The term. I'm moving away from the term neurodivergent in general because it's too broad. It is useful for explaining the neurodiversity affirming movement 101, but people use this term to avoid saying autistic or assuming the autistics whom the term applies to. Actually, neurodivergence is the norm. Each neurodivergent neurotype is a divergence. I hope that makes sense. So if you mean autistic, say autistic, not neurodivergent. If you mean an allistic neurodivergent person, try to specify their neurotype. Can't always. Let's use neurodiversity, neurodivergent, etc. when discussing the concepts and human rights aspects. What's your thoughts on this one?
Well, that's complicated, isn't it? This is a person who used to use the word neurodivergent and is deciding now not to, for good reasons. Yeah, I had something to say, but it's gone now. But neurodivergent. I think it's about specificity, about being specific, which some people are after in life. And I agree that it is a definition to be used accurately. But sometimes it's these things are placeholders, they're convenient. And I think part of conversation, when we're not being specific, is to assume we have a common meaning, or we are referring to. Sometimes it doesn't even matter if we are referring to the same thing, as long as we can kind of continue communicating by using these placeholders. So I can see the point, but I would defend anyone who uses it when they haven't got full knowledge.
Wow, Raymond, I love what you just said there. This concept of placeholdering, and trying to communicate even if the words don't mean quite the same things to each other. This is a really important part of communication that I think a lot of advocates miss out on, that we have to be a little bit flexible on people's knowledge. But then going back to what Yale is saying, I do agree, because there is this washing over with the word neurodivergent. Originally, I saw a post on LinkedIn trying to remind everybody, trying to remind the professions that originally, when the idea was put forward, neurodivergent meant about 20% of the population. It included autistic people, it included ADHD people, it included people with brain injuries, it included people with differences of brain when they were born, like cerebral palsy or other things that affected or changed the structure of the brain, so that we could say that there was a population of people who had relatively grown up in one group and another that differed enough from that other group, but they differed from the group that you were putting them as well. So what has happened is that the polite way of calling somebody autistic or ADHD now is to call them neurodivergent. And it is a bit sloppy. I don't like being called neurodivergent, if I'm honest. I think the idea of being divergent is like being cut away from the human race. Whereas when I say I'm autistic, I feel as I'm attaching myself to a group that makes sense, that will give some kind of understanding about me. If I say I'm neurodivergent, it doesn't have a sense of how I might be. It's not specific enough to me. But then I also know that if I say I'm autistic, people's understanding of the word autistic is so far away from my current understanding, that has changed so dramatically, knowing I'm autistic from beforehand. We just have to be kind to everybody with these terms. But yes, Yale does make a really good point here.
Essentially, it's an identity issue, isn't it?
I would say so. It's just how sometimes these words come around, and in a lot of people's minds it makes a lot of sense. But sometimes you can overuse a term, or you can over broadenize a term, which goes over not just one group of people, but it goes over so many groups of people. Once you start doing that, people's identities seem to feel washed away, and it seems that people are just put in a bigger box. Like, if they're not put in a box where, oh, you're autistic, and they put you in a box even though you're an individual, all they're doing, you're feeling now, is just put you in a bigger box with other people. So you're just sharing a box, a stereotypical box with other people. So I can understand the concern over it, and it's just the way that terminology and language can go sometimes. The overuse of terminology and the overuse of words in general language to define something even though it's not the total definition.
It feels like divergent is almost an identification with the difference.
The thing that I notice about today and what people try to promote, and I certainly support, is individuality. So the individual identity, so everyone's different from one another. Even if you're autistic, you're different from other autistic people. I totally support that. But sometimes people feel that sometimes terminology, as Jules already says, can cut you off or feel you're cutting off from the rest of society in general. And then that's when the loneliness thing comes in, the exclusion part comes in, and it's quite dangerous. It's all about balance. It's all about remembering what you're saying and how you say it, and how that can affect people. The next post is from Thriving Autistic, who are a non-profit organisation by and for autistic and otherwise neurodivergent community. And what they've shared is about internalised ableism. And what they say is internalised ableism is a frequent topic in autistic adult meetups and discovery courses. It can be hard to let go of how we think we should fit in and can affect our well-being. We have found our community groups help validate experiences and can then help advocacy. How does it impact you? And what helps? What's people's thoughts on this? What the post adds as well is the internalised ableism. Are there things you feel like you should do to fit in?
I'm just trying to figure out how this relates to ableism. So it's suggesting that you don't feel you're able when you think you should fit in.
Um, I'm just trying to kind of reel out what ableism is. It's like, is it a patronising thing? Or is it... I need to kind of relate to, again, what ableism is. I mean, I knew what it was when I shared this, but it's been a couple of days, so I'll pause thought.
The way I've understood it is you have racism about race, you have sexism about sex, gender, and you have ableism that is discrimination against disabled people, amongst which autistic people are defined as a disability group. And internalized ableism is essentially guilt. It's this feeling or this internal acceptance of society's prejudices against disabled people. So you yourself feel that when disabled people are criticised, that you accept that. You feel that that is right. You don't feel that that is an attack on you, that you feel that it's okay. And it can even mean that if you are trying to fit society by joining in the way society is discriminatory against disabled people, you take actions yourself that also discriminate against disabled people. And a lot of people put forward the idea that we are so entrenched within society that we don't know when we're being racist, and we don't know when we're being sexist, and we don't know when we're being ableist, because it's all put upon us and internalized.
So this is a constant. This is what I see as conditioning. And to counter ableism in yourself and in the world really puts you out there. And that's why people sometimes can't do it, and so resort to the safety and security of the greater group and fitting into its values. But there's, what's that Shakespeare quote? There's something rotten in whatever country it was, but there's just a bad feeling about it. As you say, guilt, yeah.
I can't help but help you with that, as I'm autistic. Something rotten in the state of Denmark, from Hamlet.
I just had it was Scotland because I was thinking of Macbeth. Before we move on to the next post, is there anything you want to add, Jules?
I just wanted to make absolutely sure that we get down to one of the posts that's a bit further in, because there's been a reaction online while we've been talking, a live post. I'll just share it with you. I don't think we're going to get to it, so I want to make sure we do cover it, and I've put it in the private chat so people can go directly to the post. But if it's okay, I'll read it out. The one you shared is about rejection sensitivity, and has had a couple of love the comments. And what the post is saying is that a common experience of neurodivergent people that can be really overwhelming is rejection sensitivity. And they have images describing a bit of what it's like and some ways of how to support ourselves through it. It's really important to me, this post, because I care about other people feeling rejected by me, because I know the feeling of rejection. And it describes rejection sensitivity as a fear of rejection, a trauma response. The sensitivity means that people tend to believe that others dislike us, though that might not be true. That's the sensitivity part. And it's common amongst neurodivergent people. What does it feel like? It feels isolating. It feels as though you doubt yourself to such a degree that it disables you and cripples you. It can be overwhelming. It can cause meltdowns. It's consuming. You can't think of other things because you are under this feeling that you are being rejected. And when you found yourself oversensitized to rejection sensitivity, it makes it really difficult to establish and maintain relationships, and attempting those things can be really overwhelming too. And then it goes on to what supports can help. It says that having your feelings validated. People saying that what you are feeling is real and not just dismissing it. If you have friends and family to check in, it would be lovely if they did. Another thing to help is if you've created for yourself or practiced some positive affirmative scripts, things that say to yourself that I am worth it, I'm not being rejected, I'm just oversensitive to it, and I can get through this, I can and I will, and I have the ability. Understanding it and being able to describe it is a support for yourself, and taking time and space to regulate yourself without immediately taking actions that might further your feelings of rejection, because perhaps you even, cause yourself to be rejected by, being so sensitive perhaps that you lash out and you make it difficult for people to give you the supports that you want. And then the post goes on to say that there are Facebook groups and that there are books written. So this is from Autistically Scott, and it's made with Laura Hellfield, Neurodivergent Nurse Consulting, and Neurodiverse Journeys. Thank you, Harry, for letting me make sure that came in, because somebody on the live has loved that post as we've been speaking.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you for raising it, and just in case I never got around to it, because sometimes it just depends on times, but it is a very interesting post. It's a very interesting topic, and I do identify with it well. The term of rejection sensitivity, the fear of making a decision or attempting to do something in fear of feeling or getting rejected for a number of reasons. And that includes stuff even like job interviews, etc. So I know that feeling. I know how it can make you feel defensive, and I mean, I've been through that phase actually, thinking about it. Kind of being defensive and resentful because of that feeling, that fear. And it's just about overcoming it and getting the right support and gradually believing in yourself. And I think I've done that in a way, but not completely, of course. I mean, there's no magic wand, there's no trick to it. It's just about learning and developing and coping. That's my experience on it.
For me, I think the point of the post is that once you have been sensitized, it's like being allergic to something. It's such an overwhelming sense that it makes it difficult for you to sometimes rationalize what's going on around you. The sensitivity means that even if you look at something and you feel that there might be that possibility that somebody is reaching out to you, the thing at the back of your head tells you that it's another possibility of rejection. It's another, and that is disabling. That makes it so difficult to make a step forward, because you feel as though you're immediately going to get knocked back. I don't think this is a matter of just trying harder or being more social or getting it right. I think this is just eventually getting to trust that some people around you are willing to allow you to go off on one, behave in ways that they find difficult, but allow you back and involve you again. And only after you have gone away and then come back and you've been welcomed again do you get to trust. It's a real hard thing to trust when you are sensitized already by so many experiences as a trauma.
Are we saying that this comes from an initial trauma, or is someone born with rejection sensitivity?
I don't know, but the likelihood is that these things build up over time, over experience, and the trauma builds up. Whether you started in a more sensitive place because you were autistic in the first place, or whether your first experiences of life. I mean, my experience right down to primary school was basically being rejected from every fucking group, you know? Constantly going to a new school and constantly being the outsider, constantly being the spaz. So I would say to some degree all autistic people get sensitized towards rejection.
I think I do, and it's maybe part of this create and practice self-positive scripts, is I always look for the opposite of a concept. So if I'm thinking about rejection, I think, what's the opposite of rejection? It's possibly acceptance. And in a sense, that might be what I'm desiring, is to be accepted, rather than I am being rejected. Although I can identify with what you say at a very young age of having all that energy and desire to go out and play and interact, and it doesn't work. And it consistently doesn't work for you. There are variant ways of coping with that, but I can see where it all comes from, yeah.
Yeah, but I can identify with a lot of the things that have been said by yourself, Raymond and Jules. I mean, I can recall, sometimes I even overthink them, about instances in the past where I felt I've been rejected or certainly ridiculed. And it's something that does, it causes you feel you're being rejected from maybe a group of people or by someone, or you feel that that's a likelihood to happen, so you just avoid that kind of scenario altogether. I can totally get about a lot of it because, in my experience, looking back to school, I mean, I was always ridiculed, even before I opened my mouth, because I had red hair and freckles and very wavy hair as well. I mean, it's something I used to moan about, but now being bald, it's like I wish I had that hair back. It's amazing how life goes, but it's just like there was like a kind of trigger for people to reject you or to ridicule you. So you feel, or I felt, that I was excluded and rejected and tried and became sensitive to that. So would avoid certain situations where there may be inclusion there, but I just didn't trust the process because of that amount of rejection or being ridiculed. Um, impacted me at some part of my life. And as Jules says as well, it's not always something that can be trained or whatever. It's something that's put within you, and it's a defense mechanism, and it's the way you are as well. Depending, everybody's different. I can only talk from my own opinion and my own point of view, but it's just not that simple. But it's certainly a great topic to touch on every now and again, because everybody goes, well, not everybody, but a lot of people do go through this at least, and it's something that it's very important within a milestone in our life. Sensitivity to rejection stopped us believing on who's to reach out. I would say so, yes, Jules. The next post is from Spectrum Serafina, which is a personal blog, autistic and ADHD blogger, raising an autistic son, building community, women empowering women. And what she shared is the following. If you're an autistic female, at what age were you diagnosed? I wasn't diagnosed until I was 30. What were some signs of autism in your childhood that were missed or overlooked? One of mine was my aversions to textures and clothing fabrics. When I was 4 years old, I was in a wedding. I vividly remember being in agony because of the scratchy fabric underneath my dress. Does anyone know what that fabric is called? Tulle, perhaps, but it was hell. And this is kind of supporting text on Autism Serafina's presentation about why my autism was missed as a child. And the first thing it says, I presented like an own girl, again. And the introductory part was, I presented like an outgoing, talkative little girl. I was perceptive of others' emotions and hyper-empathetic. Contrary to popular misconception, autistic people can actually be hyper-empathetic. What's other thoughts?
My first reaction here is I can't even remember when I was 5 or 6 years old.
What I'll do, to make the presentation fair is just go through the presentation itself and then we can have a discussion. Because I only read the supporting text to explain what it was. So, why my autism was missed as a child? And it says at the beginning, as I said before, I presented like an outgoing, talkative little girl. I was perceptive of others' emotions and hyper-empathetic. Contrary to popular misconception, autistic people can actually be hyper-empathetic. I learned to start masking by age 5 and have vivid memories of learning to mask. I would sit quietly in social environments and constantly listen to people's dialogue, mentally filing and cataloguing social interactions was a constant pastime. I was an early reader, and by age 8 I was devouring multiple books per week. I would use these books to further my knowledge of social interactions. From the safety of books, I would memorise endless scripts, jokes, and what I deemed to be useful social dialogue, which I would then utilise when interacting with my peers. My interests were considered acceptable for a girl. My hyperfixations were things like dolls and horses. My tendency to play the same type of scripted storylines with my dolls went unnoticed, although it annoyed my friends. I often collected toys rather than played with them, and took fastidious care of them. While I struggled to maintain friendships, I was able to make friends as a child. Keeping friendships was difficult, as my repetitive behaviours, stimming, and narrow interests often made people lose interest in me. I always felt like an outsider, and the nuances of female social behaviour went completely over my head. This only grew more difficult as I entered my teen years. All of this I internalised as personal failings, and I did not share with my parents. Much of my stimming and sensory processing struggles either flew under the radar or was misinterpreted by my parents as tantrums or willful bad behaviour to be disciplined and punished. Since I was often punished for autistic behaviours, I internalised those traits as personal failings and would berate myself endlessly for them. While my inner torment was relentless, I didn't speak of it to anyone. I didn't know how to verbalise what I felt, and so I stayed silent. Silence and compliance were rewarded by my parents, so I did my best to be an obedient child. The social pressures of being female essentially stifled and masked my autistic traits from noticeable view. I was punished for stimming, punished for meltdowns, punished for social blunders. Pain was a harsh taskmaster, but I learned quickly what was acceptable and what wasn't. Between being physically punished by my parents or emotionally punished by peer rejection, from as far back as I can remember, I was moulding myself into who I thought others wanted me to be. I do not blame my parents. They did their best to raise me. Nothing was commonly known about autism in girls in the 90s. One of the key reasons why so many autistic girls slip under the radar is due to the social pressures placed upon us from a young age. We're expected to behave better and mature faster than boys are. The social complexities of females are more nuanced and we tend to learn masking very young. It is important as parents to be aware of the more subtle and nuanced ways autism can present in little girls, because it can present vastly differently than it does in boys. That was quite intense and quite a descriptive description, and comes up with a lot of good points. What's other people's thoughts on this after I've read the presentation?
Well read, Harry. That was quite an honest kind of, I was going to say recitation of someone's personal history. You don't often see that. It reminded me of that thing of when you're getting your diagnosis and you're asked if there's anybody who knew you when you were a child so they can reflect their knowledge and experiences of your history. And it's difficult when you don't have anyone left who can do that in a late diagnosis. So there can be an element of projection back into your youth about a lot of things you feel now. You can reinterpret your life, as it were. And that may be accurate, it may not be, but a lot of this I could identify with. I'm trying to get back to some of the pages or the quotes, but the thing about sitting and listening to people when you're really young, I used to pretend I was asleep just to pick up stuff. Masking, I'm not absolutely sure about that. But the thing about following trends as well, when other kids move on to new things and you're maybe still stuck in the old, the things that make you feel safe and secure, can be obvious when you're young. So, but I'm really looking into and trying to understand the part which is talking about being a girl or a female and how different that feels for her to autism in boys. But I'll read through it again and hear what others have to say.
From reading through that, and reading out aloud as well. Of course, I don't have that experience because I'm male, grew up as a boy, but I do recall when I went to social groups back in the late 90s when I was first diagnosed, as most of the members of these groups were male at the time, and there was the odd female, the odd women, young women who'd be there, and I can remember asking that because I was kind of surprised, and they said at the time, going back to the late 90s, that it was harder to diagnose what the terminology was at the time, Asperger's syndrome or autism, within females, within young girls, because young girls stereotypically, I need to add, apparently are more sociable, and they can apparently socialise better. They can, it's like, not better, it's more like something, it's a different kind of way that girls supposedly do, according to what I've read and what some people have said, and what some women and young girls have said. And that's why it's only, a lot of females, a lot of women will be getting diagnosed quite late. And, just like men are, but, it could be later than men. I don't know, I haven't read any information regarding that, but I can understand, that it seems like females always seem to get a bad break in everything, and this is just something else, for whatever reason. But maybe it's because of the stereotypes, the behaviours that are expected, and when we're going back to school in terms of boys and girls. And yep, I think it's just the kind of outdated kind of medical model in the past about it relating more to males than to females. I think that's actually been said, hasn't it? It's autism was more related to males than females. It was like it was a male disorder, so to speak, rather than a female one, which is, as we know now, totally nonsense.
Sorry, I was away for a minute. I'm noticing in the text that Raymond is saying that is the diagnosis in the past a male orientated reading and judged on male standards, and that is the history. Yeah, it was thought originally that autism was only a boy's thing, and there was a rather discredited professional who described it as the extreme male brain. He came from Australia, so it's the inherently misogynistic idea encapsulated in that men and women have different brains, and that autistic men are overly dependent on the things that make you male. My wife's experience is very similar to what's been described here. There is absolutely no way that she would have been picked out as an autistic person when she was at school, and the same for my daughter. Though with two autistic parents, it was us that would have made sure that she wasn't picked out as autistic, because I think that label would have held her back considerably. So there is a sexism built into the world of autism, and it goes both ways, because they say that the simple way they say is autistic women are more socially aware, and they manage to mask up and cover their autistic traits. But that's what guys do too. The idea that women have been masking and men haven't is a little bit too black and white. What we have is a society which treats men and women very differently right from the beginning. And what a little boy can express without having to cover it up is much different from a little girl. Little girls are held to very different standards. Every study shows that women are constantly criticised as children and constantly undermined. Recently, a study pointed out that little girls themselves overestimate the intelligence of their little boy counterparts, and little boy counterparts underestimate the intelligence of little girls. It's built in right in primary school.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's always, it's a stereotype, it's a sort of stereotypical label, male and female, boy and girl, what's expected from behaviours and what to expect in terms of, it's like this typical average person thing again. And this the average person, that's the average person, and that's how they do studies, and that's how they do a lot of research, especially in the past. And sometimes the people doing the research have got an ideology, so they're biased already, so they won't be as open-minded when doing such things, so a lot of things will be skewed, or, just to be bluntly, actually prejudiced, just because of the mindset that actually developed the reports or the analysis, the stats at the time, which is really infuriating actually, because a lot of people have missed out because of that. And the only thing we can say positive about it is things have got better, and that there are platforms to kind of state that people that have kind of suffered those situations in the past, and these experiences can be shared to other people who may feel that they're in that scenario.
I think it's worth reading what Raymond says. Being judged on male standards, the idea of failing to be a man by being autistic, and that in the past women were always judged as being emotional. And really it's all mask, and we're put into little boxes. Everybody wants to put people into boxes, whereas the human experience is always about grey scales.
The next post is from the Autistic teacher. Public figure, autistic and proud, sharing insight and understanding to help the autistic community based in the UK. And they've shared a diagram, a presentation, and it's about things that don't make sense as an autistic person. So number one, small talk. Why do people feel the need to fill the gaps with meaningless conversations? I would rather have a deep conversation sharing information and understanding. Fashion. Don't get me wrong, there are some trendy autistic people out there, but due to sensory needs, many of us prefer comfortable clothing that we can tolerate without having the itch and scratch all day. Eye contact. Eye contact doesn't come naturally to many of us. I can listen far better when there is no demand to look at someone's eyes. It's strange that some people think that staring at someone's eyeballs is the golden standard of listening. Just no. saying things that are not true. This is a huge amount of stuff that neurotypical people say that just isn't true. Wish you were here. Oh really? I'm sorry. Looks great. And people seem to get mightily offended when you share the truth. What do others feel about this? Certainly sounds relatable to me.
Speaking the truth is like an existential crisis for people who've been conditioned into having a certain set of responses. Society doesn't actively encourage it, and a lot of this, I think, is not necessarily limited to autistic people. So, what did I write down? Small talk. I'm okay with small talk because no conversation is meaningless. If we refer back to what we were saying earlier about placeholders and words that might not make sense, but at least we're communicating. Even if it doesn't feel sometimes like we're communicating, we are. Fashion. It's nice to look nice sometimes, to be aesthetically pleasing. You know, that can be really stimulating to, I don't know, show off. But again, you know, a lot of it is consumerism. Eye contact, we all these love songs that were written about looking into your eyes, you know. I wouldn't give up on eye contact, but I know how difficult it is. Saying things that are not true, yeah. I'll leave it at that.
I can understand, well, I relate to it all, but there is a lot of fluff out there. There's a lot of kind of spin that people do in conversations that I've noticed to make them sound better or to make something sound more exciting in a story. And I've always, why do people exaggerate like that? Just say as it was. You can say things in a certain way without exaggerating. It just seems like there's this demand for people to feel like they've got to, you know, present themselves as something absolutely brilliant so that you'll be impressed. Yes, Raymond, I agree. We like to tell stories. I mean, I do it myself. I mean, there's many times on here that I was asked a question and I basically, instead of saying yes or no, I end up giving a big story and then saying what the answer is. So, absolutely. And I've done it as a habit. I've done, you know, in conversation as well. And I've been caught out in questionnaires. But the truth is a big deal for me. I'm not going to say that I don't tell lies, but see if I do tell a lie, even if it's for some sort of good reasoning, it's absolutely torture to feel that I've done so, because honesty is a big thing.
In music, there's a term called guide vocal, which where you just hum something. Like Paul McCartney used it for Yesterday. He sang scrambled eggs. You know, it's something to fill in. And there's another phrase: "Fake it till you make it." If you want to do something or express yourself, sometimes you just have to talk crap until you form it into something, maybe a wee jewel, you know?
I'm sorry, I have to go slightly against the grain on this, because I remember being young, and one of the things I did when I was a kid was I would exaggerate, and I suppose it's a childish thing, and I think, yes, there is truth that autistic people would prefer to try to stick to what they can see as truths, whatever that be, and that there is a routine to exaggeration and white lies and things that go with non-autistic life that we're uncomfortable with. But I also know some autistic people, and one of the most amusing things about them is their wild exaggeration sometimes. I have a I have a friend who I have constantly throughout the 20 odd years that I've known him said, and asked him to bring it back a bit, because what he's doing is he's describing a truth by using things that are beyond truth. But the truth is still in there, but the exaggeration feels necessary for him to get there.
Fair point. Intellectual stimming, is it? I think that's Raymond's point.
Yeah, it can be quite stimulating to exaggerate within your own mind and thought process. It's highly creative.
Yeah, I suppose I've done that. I suppose what this presents, is autistic teachers given one, individual experience and how they feel of their autistic experience. And then we're just saying, well, it's not all like that. And obviously, autistic teacher and people will be aware that it's not like that. But it creates that conversation. And maybe I was sort of kind of stereotyping it a little bit myself.
Do you not find it sounds slightly snooty sometimes, some of these posts? Um, not that I've got it, I'm not saying nothing about teachers.
Sometimes you put things in language that can be looked upon and discussed upon. I wouldn't say snooty. Or maybe some are actually. Who am I to say how you find them?
If what you're saying there, Ray, is that it looks as though autistic people are othering non-autistic people and actually biting back, yeah, I think that's obvious in lots of posts that sometimes the only way of getting something said out there is pushing the pendulum too far the other way, and there's lots of stuff that you read online that really are a built-up anger in autistic people to actually denigrate the other group as though they're in some kind of, war. And, you can expect it, but we look between the lines, don't we?
Yep.
The last post for this evening is from Joy of Autism. It's a personal blog, and the page is dedicated to their son Jacob and for all the autistic and their families and friends. My goal is to inform, advocate, and educate and share smiles. And what they've shared is what autism means in different languages or cultures. So I'll just share it. Autism. Chinese, it says self-enclosure disorder. Hindi, self-reliant. Icelandic, revolve around oneself. Muri, in their own space and time. Greek, directed from within. And Korean, closed off by oneself. What's people's brief thoughts on this?
You gotta love them Greeks. I remember sharing the Maori one in the Amaze Discord, right, and it got refuted constantly by almost everyone. So, there you go.
I just thought it was interesting to share. Sometimes we can get bogged down in our own language, and then when you go to other languages, sometimes it can say something completely different about what you're talking about, sometimes in a positive light in perception, or sometimes a negative light in perception, just depends who you are and how you're feeling at one time. So thanks everyone for this evening. It's, as I said, on a positive note. It's been another great night of discussion, and from the Facebook posts, etc. So thanks to everyone who's shared the posts that were shared tonight. It was very interesting, quite intense in some places, but we kept up with the Christmas theme as well, which is very important in the run up to that occasion that's coming up quite soon. So this is Live Unmasked for the 8th of December 2024, and as part of the Spectrum Voices Conversation, which is here every Sunday, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. UK time, which is 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, United States, on Podbeam and Facebook Live and elsewhere. So thanks everyone, and now I'll hand over to Jules.
Thanks, Harry. Yes, emotionally intense as always, but lots of fun there too. This is the time where we put the open meeting of Autistic Radio and the charity that supports Autistic Radio, the entirely autistic charity, Autistic Association. I need to describe some of the things I've been doing this week.